The night he promised relief should have been a turning point. She had worked endlessly, drained every last favor, and bent her pride to free him from the crushing weight of debt. The ink on the papers was still drying when he turned. His words, slicing colder than any blade. Gratitude never touched his lips. Instead, betrayal carved itself into her memory. What she had thought was salvation became the moment he twisted the knife, ensuring she would never forget the sting of misplaced loyalty. His eyes, glinting with arrogance, made her understand that everything she had given was merely fuel for his selfish triumph. She did not cry. Not then, not later. Tears would have given him satisfaction, and she refused him that. Instead, silence grew inside her like armor. Each word she withheld, each emotion she smothered, sharpened her resolve. Where others might have screamed, she only watched, letting him mistake her stillness for weakness. He believed the silence meant surrender, that her absence of protest meant he had broken her. What he never realized was that silence, in her hands, was sharper than rage. If you're enjoying this story, don't forget to subscribe to our channel for more. It was when he sneered, tossing her loyalty aside like ash, that the spark within her caught fire. "You've served your purpose," he said, lips curling, with cruel dismissal. He believed her only value lay in what she had already done for him, blind to the storm he had just unleashed. The words echoed in her chest, not as wounds, but as a vow. A purpose discarded, yes, but a new one born. Vengeance was no longer a shadowy thought, but a clear, steady flame. He believed he had ended her story. He had only written its beginning. Ani. The surface, she gave nothing away. Her face remained composed, her tone even, her actions unshaken. To him, it seemed as though she had accepted her dismissal with grace. But beneath that calm mask, her mind spun threads of strategy. Every arrogant gesture he made, every careless smirk, every assumption of power only wove the rope he would, one day, hang himself with. She rehearsed her patience the way others rehearsed speeches, knowing her time would come. Composure was not her surrender, it was her weapon. When he flaunted his betrayal with cruel timing, mocking her in front of those who once praised her loyalty, he unknowingly gave her the first receipt in the ledger she was building. She remembered the date, the place, the way his voice lingered with ridicule. That moment became the cornerstone of her quiet accounting. She didn't need to rush, didn't need to announce her intentions. One by one, every slight, every deception, every moment of arrogance would be carefully recorded, not for pity, but for proof. His downfall would not come from her fury, but from his own hand. She had once believed that love meant sacrifice, so she poured herself into his debts as though saving him meant saving them both. While her friends chased careers and passions, she chased numbers on a ledger. Every overtime shift and sleepless night funneling into payments he had recklessly piled onto their shoulders. She carried the weight not as duty but as devotion, convincing herself that his mistakes were temporary and that their bond was worth the bruises of exhaustion. Each bill she settled was a promise kept, though none of them had been hers to make. To the world, he was magnetic, smiling at dinner parties, the charming storyteller who never hinted at the chaos behind their front door. Guests saw a man of taste and ambition. She saw the unpaid credit cards stacked on the counter. He basked in admiration while she stood invisible, the quiet shadow propping up his extravagance. In private, his charm cracked into entitlement. Every dollar she earned, treated as his due. While she stretched paychecks like thread, he laughed too loudly, lived too large, and let ruin creep in as though it were her responsibility to sweep it away. Looking back, the warnings had always been there, buried in excuses. The clout, business. Deals that never materialized, the half-truths about lost paychecks, the smug way he brushed off consequences as if she would always clean up after him. Flashbacks came like whispers in the night. The times he dismissed her concerns with arrogance. The moments he framed her sacrifices as proof of love. They had not been random lapses. They were patterns. Red flags waving furiously while she tried to paint them in calmer colors. Every loan tied them closer, not as husband and wife, but as debtor and guarantor. She picked up shifts no one else wanted, sold heirlooms she had sworn she'd keep, and lived on scraps while he spent as if life owed him grandeur. Each late notice was another thread unraveling from the fabric of their marriage, every desperate side job another stitch binding her to his reckless ambition. Their union was not built on trust or dreams, but on debt layered so thick it suffocated the very idea of partnership. The illusion shattered slowly, then all at once. She realized she had never been his partner in the truest sense. She had been his lender, his insurer, the silent financier of his collapsing empire. Love had been the mask that disguised exploitation, and devotion had been rebranded into obligation. When the veil cracked, she saw herself not through his eyes, but through reality's reflection. She was not his wife in practice, only the banker of his failures, discarded the moment her use ran dry. His arrogance had always foreshadowed this outcome. The casual jabs, the poisonous little comments. "You're lucky I chose you. No one else would put up with me," once brushed off as jokes, now revealed themselves as truths wrapped in cruelty. He had never respected her sacrifices, only expected them. His arrogance was not careless, it was calculated entitlement, and every word he left behind now echoed as a warning she wished she had heeded earlier. The betrayal, when it finally came, was not just of the heart. It gutted her finances, stripped her dignity, and mocked her loyalty. He reduced her existence to an investment he had already cashed out, walking away not only with her trust shattered, but with her future jeopardized. It was not just a broken heart. It was theft of years, of effort, of self-worth, leaving behind not ruins of love, but the debris of exploitation. When the door finally closed behind him, she did not scream or chase after him. Rage could have consumed her, but instead, she chose silence. A silence heavy enough to suffocate, steady enough to sharpen. She turned to the pile of contracts, receipts, signatures, every paper trail he had left like breadcrumbs leading to his undoing. What had once been evidence of her devotion now became artifacts of his betrayal. She gathered them with eerie calm, every page collected not as a victim's mourning but as an architect's blueprint. And so the ledger opened, not of finance, but of revenge. Her pain did not scatter, it organized. Every document filed away was not for closure, but for calculation. What he thought was an ending became her beginning, each piece of proof tucked carefully into place. It was no longer about recovering what she had lost, but about ensuring he would lose far more. In her silence, a storm was building, and this time it was she who held the pen, recording not debts to be paid, but justice to be delivered. She began with the numbers, tracing them like a detective combing through crime scene footprints. Bank, statements, loan agreements, overdue notices. Each one carried a weight she hadn't recognized before. Late at night, when the house was silent, she laid them out across the table in a grim mosaic of betrayal. The deeper she went, the clearer the truth became. Most of these debts had never been hers to carry. They were his creations, his illusions, of grandeur. And she had been the silent guarantor holding up an empire built on sand. The signatures told their own story. She remembered how he'd slid papers across the table with a quick smile and a dismissive, "Just sign here." Flashbacks burned through her mind, moments when she'd hesitated, only for him to nudge her with false reassurance. "Don't overthink it, trust me," he would say, as though her instincts were inconveniences. She had signed out of love, out of loyalty, out of a belief that marriage was partnership. Now, every flourish of ink on those pages looked less like devotion, and more like shackles he had clasped around her wrists. It was in the hidden corners of those records that she discovered the sharpest wound of all. Accounts she had never known existed, quiet transfers to destinations far from their shared life. Money siphoned, funneled into a secret stash, not for emergencies, not for their future, but for his escape. The betrayal was no longer abstract. It was ink and numbers, proof of a plan he had crafted in silence while she drowned in the debts he left behind. He had not only abandoned her emotionally, he had prepared to abandon her entirely. She could have stormed into the room, papers in hand, demanding answers, but what satisfaction would that bring? Rage was fleeting, patience was power. So she wore a mask of composure, biting her tongue when he strutted about as if invincible. Behind that mask, however, she sharpened her resolve like a blade, building her plan with precision. Each file she copied, each statement she tucked away became another brick in the foundation of something far greater than confrontation. He would not see it coming until it was too late. And why would he suspect? His arrogance blinded him. He flaunted a new life, as if debts and broken vows could be erased with champagne and Instagram filters. Expensive toys lined his driveway, a new lover clung to his arm, and his posts dripped with bravado. He believed he had escaped, reborn into a world where she was nothing more than a discarded chapter. The show was for everyone else, but to her, every boast was a confession, every display another thread she could weave into her case against him. When they finally sat across from each other in the lawyer's office, she did not cry or plead. He expected a scene, perhaps even begged forgiveness, but instead she offered silence. Not the silence of defeat, but of calculation. Her calm nods, her detached manner, unnerved him more than anger ever could. He searched her face for cracks, for signs of the woman he thought he could control, but all he found was an unreadable calm that gnawed at him long after the meeting ended. What he never realized was that she had been keeping a ledger of her own. Every lie, every theft, every betrayal meticulously documented in a folder labeled with cruel simplicity. Receipts. Neatly organized, irrefutable, and damning, it was the weapon he would never see coming until the blade was already at his throat. He thought she was done, beaten, erased from his future. But she had been writing her own ending, one where his arrogance became his undoing, and her silence became the loudest strike of all. His greed became his undoing. After years of draining her dry and leaving her with scars disguised as debt, he stood tall in his arrogance and demanded more. Alimony, property, a share of what little she had managed to rebuild. His voice rang with entitlement, as if the years of sacrifice she bore for him were nothing more than currency to be wrung. Out further, he had forgotten whose hands had signed the loans that shielded him from ruin, whose name had been dragged through the mud while his remained untarnished. He no longer saw her as the one who carried his weight. He saw her only as a resource to be bled. When the day came, he walked into the courtroom draped in overconfidence. Every step carried the swagger of a man convinced the system was his ally, certain she would crumble under the pressure of litigation. To him, composure was weakness, and silence was submission. He mistook her stillness for fear, blind to the fact that it was restraint, the quiet confidence of someone who already knew how the story would end. The law, however, had rules he could not bend with charm or bravado. In his greed, he was forced to disclose his finances, forced to spread open the pages of his empire for all to see. It was then that he walked willingly into the snare she had laid with patience and precision. The numbers he thought were hidden, the transfers he assumed buried, all found their way into daylight, each line another thread of the web tightening around him. She sat in silence, her presence sharper than any words could be. The predator who once circled her now found himself on display, every ounce of swagger stretched thin over the panic rising beneath. His eyes darted, his tone grew harsher, but no attack could pierce the calm she carried like armor. The shift was invisible to him until it was complete. He was prey, and she was the one holding the hunt in her hands. The judge's questions were quiet but lethal. Each inquiry tugged at a thread he never imagined anyone would pull. Dates that didn't align, accounts he swore didn't exist, contradictions spilling from his own mouth as he scrambled to explain away what could not be explained. His smirk faltered, his answers grew desperate, and the weight of his own lies pressed down heavier with each passing moment. Then came the moment she had been waiting for. With steady hands, she reached into her bag and laid the folder on the table, labeled simply, "Receipts." She opened it with the precision of someone who had rehearsed this unveiling in her mind 100 times. One by one, the documents slid into the light. Statements, transfers, forged signatures, proof of every betrayal meticulously gathered. The courtroom, once his stage for arrogance, became hers. Her silence spoke louder than any accusation, her evidence sharper than any blade. And as the walls of his empire crumbled around him, she remained what she had always been, composed, unshaken, and in absolute control. He began with a smile so polished it could have been rehearsed in front of a mirror. To the court, he painted her as weak and dependent, a fragile woman clinging to his success. Each lie dripped with confidence, his words smooth and persuasive as he cast himself the victim of her supposed incompetence. He spoke of sacrifice, of carrying her for years, of debts he claimed were his burden alone. The performance was flawless. On the surface, each gesture sharp, each glance rehearsed. But she listened quietly, her eyes steady, her silence deliberate, letting him build the very pyre he would burn upon. She waited, not with impatience but with precision. Every exaggeration, every smug declaration, she stored like ammunition. The perfect moment was never at the height of noise. It lived in the pause, in the breath he took between triumph and certainty. That pause came, long enough for silence to settle, long enough for the court to lean in, expecting her collapse. Instead, she struck. From her bag came the folder, plain and unassuming. She opened it with calm hands, placing documents on the table one by one. Records of debts she had paid, accounts he had hidden, signatures twisted by forgery. Each page slid forward like a blade across glass, and with every record unveiled, the illusion of his story shattered further. There was no rush, no anger, only the steady rhythm of truth laid bare. His smirk faltered for the first time. The mask of arrogance cracked as the judge leaned closer, his eyes narrowing at the inconsistencies that could no longer be ignored. The control he thought unshakable slipped from his grasp, replaced by the tremor in his voice and the tightening of his jaw. Every document stripped another layer from his defense, until nothing remained but naked lies. The gallery stirred. Lawyers whispered. Spectators exchanged startled glances, and even the judge's gavel could not mask the shift in the room. What had begun as his theater of dominance had transformed into her arena of proof. Gasps followed each revelation, each line, that tied him to betrayal and deceit. For the first time in years, he looked cornered. His arrogance melted into panic, his eyes darting for exits that no longer existed. He had mistaken her silence for surrender, never realizing it was the silence of a predator watching prey stumble into the trap. Behind her calm expression was a strength that had waited, patient and sharp, for this very unraveling. She never raised her voice. She didn't need to. The truth itself had teeth, and it tore through every falsehood he had built. Power returned to her not in shouts or accusations, but in the quiet dignity of proof undeniable. Revenge was never her aim. Justice was. And justice was cutting him deeper than any words could. As the courtroom fell into a heavy stillness, she gathered her folder and closed it with care. The silence that followed was hers, and it rang louder than any verdict yet spoken. One thought lingered in her mind, steady and unshaken. She hadn't needed revenge in words. The receipts had spoken for her, and they spoke louder than anything she could ever say. The gavel struck, and with it, the weight of his lies collapsed in full view of the court. The judge's voice carried no mercy as orders were issued for repayment, every fraudulent maneuver he thought hidden now exposed. His demand for alimony dissolved into nothingness, replaced by the obligation to return what he had stolen. The smug confidence he had paraded so boldly evaporated in seconds, leaving him pale and hollow before the truth he could no longer outrun. What began as murmurs outside the courtroom spread like wildfire. Colleagues, neighbors, even old friends spoke his name with disdain. The whispers hardened into headlines, each story peeling back another layer of his fraud and arrogance. The empire of reputation he had built on charm and deceit crumbled, and where once he had commanded attention with pride, now he was met only with ridicule. His face in print no longer symbolized success, but the cautionary tale of a man undone by greed. The so-called new life he had flaunted unraveled quickly. Creditors circled. Debt swallowed him whole, and every door he once opened with a smile now slammed in his face. Behind the looming threat of criminal charges, he stumbled, stripped of the illusions that once gave him power. Freedom had cost him everything, and the future he thought he could seize dissolved into a prison of his own making, one built from arrogance, betrayal, and fraud. She watched without spectacle. There was no need for celebration, no gloating in his fall. Her victory lived in silence, in the knowledge that she had rebuilt what he tried to shatter. While he drowned in his own ruin, she carried herself with calm dignity, her strength not loud but unshakable. To her, triumph was not measured by his destruction, but by the life she created beyond him. Each step she took was a rise from ashes, her progress steady and certain. Opportunities came, not through luck, but through resilience, the very trait he had once dismissed as weakness. While he gasped for footing in the quicksand of his choices, she thrived. Her existence itself became the mirror to his downfall, her growth reflecting his decay, and in that reflection lay the ultimate irony. He had walked away the night she cleared his debts, thinking himself free, believing she was nothing without him. Now, the debt was his to carry, and it crushed him until nothing remained of the man who once believed he was untouchable. The chains he tried to place on her had tightened around his own neck. She looked back only once, not with regret, not even with anger, but with the clarity of truth. He left me the night I paid off his debt, she thought. But in the end, he was the one who paid the price.